Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're going to get started. So today, I'm going to present with Justin from Hortonworks. We're going to look into providing an overview of what we've done with Hortonworks platform and what we're doing with our clients. We're going to go into some specific examples of some use case examples. And Justin, because he understands much more of the technology in depth than I do, is going to help me look into the technology and the back end and what our technology stack looks like and how it helped us achieve the goals that we're trying to do for our clients. So let me tell you, I'm going to have Justin present our technology.
Great, thanks, Oscar. It's a pleasure to be here talking. Am I going?
You're on.
Very excited to be here talking with you all. I'm in product marketing at Hortonworks, and I focus a lot on use cases and looking for examples of how our customers are using Hortonworks data platform to solve real-world problems. And I'm very excited to be here with Oscar because they're one of our earliest customers at Hortonworks. And today you're not just going to see what they did, but you're going to see the results that the business results that they got using Hortonworks data platform. So I'll just take a couple minutes to set the stage. You've probably been hearing a lot about Hortonworks today and yesterday, but at a high level, started by 24 of the original Hadoop architects that came out of Yahoo. We focus on three things at Hortonworks: open leadership. Every line of code that's written by our engineers is contributed back to the Apache Software Foundation. Enterprise rigor. We're constantly looking for enterprise requirements to bring back into the roadmap for Hadoop so we can build those into the projects and then bring them back out to our customers. And ecosystem endorsement. From the very beginning, we have actively worked with technology partners to make sure that Hortonworks Data Platform works with all the platforms that our customers use in their enterprise data warehouse. I bring those three things up at the beginning because we'll touch on them during the presentation and with the results that Oscar will share with you. So at a high level, move through this pretty quickly, but new sources of data are putting a lot of pressure on traditional data architectures, and Hortonworks Data Platform allows enterprises to bring those new sources of data that are a little bit less structured, and we've talked about them at different sessions, but server logs, sentiment, social, and Oscar, I think, will talk about a couple of those data sources that he's working with, and join them with the existing structural data. And I think, Oscar, you were telling me about 80% of the data that Luminar works with to do their marketing analysis is more structured data, but the other 20% is less structured data they weren't able to join with that structured data before, and so it's giving them a lot of new insights to bring those data sources in. So here we look at Hortonworks Data Platform sitting side by side existing data repositories and integrating with the new source of data to bring that data to the analysis layer so that Luminar can provide to their customers analysis about the Latino segment and marketing towards that segment that was never possible before with other technologies. So if you take those new types of data and you look at them through the lenses of different industries, we have financial services customers, retail customers, telecom customers, but if you look closely at these bullets tend to boil down to one of those new types of data. So there's a server log bullet that's in financial services, and there's a server log bullet that's in utilities, oil and gas. So that's really the way that we focus on it. And when we go to new customers, we see pretty common patterns of adoption of Hadoop, again, around those new sources of data. Typically, they'll start with one new analytic app, so there's the bleeding edge use case that they really need to solve right now, and the reason they engage with us, talking about adopting Hadoop. And then what tends to happen very shortly thereafter, you heard Arun and Sean this morning talk about the data lake concept. That one use case turns into 5, 10, 20, and pretty soon the organization says, it makes sense, let's just put all of this data in a data lake and discover new things about the data that we weren't able to discover before when it was in separate data repositories. And I think Oscar will talk about that specifically, some of the results that they've had doing that with the data lake. So you've probably seen this diagram before. This is the blueprint for enterprise Hadoop. data management and data access, and then the three other pieces that any enterprise needs: data governance, security, and operations. And then, of course, at the bottom you see comprehensive enterprise Hadoop delivered completely in the open, 100% open, and wholly integrated with our partners to provide deep ecosystem interoperability. So one more slide, and then I'll hand it back to Oscar. I'm very excited to be here with Oscar for a few reasons. We're going to talk about results. They're one of our earliest customers. Also, as an aside, I'm married to a Colombian woman, so my children's names are Javier Dixon Nino Sears and Lucia Matilda Nino Sears. And so I'm rooting for Oscar and his project, the milk project that he's been talking about today, because if it works, maybe my kids will finally finish their milk. Luminar is an early adopter, one of our earliest customers. The first customer case study that was on HortonWorks.com was about how they were using HDP. Also, if you look in our industry section on our website, they're featured in the advertisers do Hadoop section, also in the retail section a little bit. And because they're one of our earliest customers, they recently migrated from 1.1 to 2.0. And that whole process took them about a day to accomplish, more or less. So Oscar will be able to talk about kind of the difference that he's seen in that process. And then, of course, want to thank Oscar again for numerous quotes and joining us at events like this to talk about the success that he's had. Last but not least, excellent results. So now let's talk about that. What have you done and what's happened?
Great. Thank you. So let me start by telling you a little bit about the company. We are working in the Hispanic space. We are working in the Latino space. And our company was formed about 2.5 years ago. We started with, we knew that we needed to shape our offering with a massive amount of data, and the current tools that were in the marketplace were not adequate enough. We partnered with HortonWorks, and they helped us, advance a lot of the things that we're doing. So what we do as a company is provide advanced analytics to understand consumers in the Hispanic space, right? We're part of a company called Entravision, which is a media holding company. It's the second largest Hispanic media company with web, internet, and radio. Our team is kind of spread out all over the place. We have folks in Chicago, Miami, some of the natural hubs where we have high concentrations of Latinos, but also we have our development staff, development team in Argentina, Buenos Aires. We have another team in Mexico City, which are our data scientists. Because we're a big believer that having enculturing language plus the data plus the analytics helps us create the value that we deliver to our clients. So I want to just share with you a little bit of the background in terms of the Hispanic market. I mean, one of the figures that is bouncing around, there's two big ones. A, that there's about 55 million U.S. Latinos, and B, that there's a $1.5 trillion market, consumer market. So really what that tells us is a number of things, but it's a fast-growing population. What's really interesting to us is that the days of targeting Latinos, like it was done 5, even 10 years ago, was I focused on language, I focused on geographic proximity, and one media channel, TV. So that low-hanging fruit of targeting Latinos in that way, it's done. Basically, it's much more complex. How do you find somebody like me, and how do you make a difference between myself, Justin's kids, and my wife, which is Megan Padilla, was Megan Mullins? How do we target her and know that she's Latina or not? So that's where we set up to do a completely different model to target Hispanics. So this brings me to the point of what we have in the marketplace today. So we have a lot of sort of limited information to work with Latinos. A lot of the information that we're looking at tends to be sample-based, self-reported, panel data. And a lot of this data is just basically doesn't provide us the depth. If we're saying that the low-hanging fruit has been picked already, right? So what's the next step? Well, I need to be highly relevant. I need to be very precise. I need to reach Latinos in a very specific way that traditional methods don't allow me to. And traditional tools don't allow me to do that either. And those traditional tools right now are very sample-based. So you have, I pick on sample because some of our competitors, not even competitors, I would say companies in the space that help us understand the Latino market, basically use sample data. You may have 100,000 individuals in your data store to be able to create, down to the zip code level decisions or insights. So we all know that that sample data falls apart the more granular that we go. I love this image because it really portrays this really well. It's kind of like this digital image. You know, the more granular that we're trying to go with sample data, the weaker our precision becomes in terms of understanding this particular market. I like to say that the sample data helps me point north, gets me the right north, but if I want to really understand empirically my audience, I need to dig much deeper. And that's what we set out to do. So if you look at, I have two examples of how this is done. I kind of like to see the blue little guy as one dimension. You know, a lot of these companies, through the methods that I described, collect that data, right? And that would be in a number of fashions that I described. So we're looking at it much different. We collect some of the data that they do, nothing sample, but all empirical. But we collect sources from about 1,600, data from about 1,600 sources. And that data is everything from online transactions, on and offline, catalog data, POS data, loyalty, and also data that really falls into this data lake that Justin is talking about. So we have, for instance, set-top box data. We don't know if we're going to fully use it, but I know that I have cable content consumption at the TV level down to an IP level that is at the household that I could correlate to an address, to a shopping grocer basket, to something else, right? So we felt that by building this very robust data environment, it would allow us to create the most precise and the most relevant way to reach this audience. And we do this for a number of industries. So let me tell you a little bit more about that data that we're talking about. So we have right now about 150 million adults in our data store appended with transactional values or transactional attributes. And these attributes, again, they're very, I'm going to have another slide that gives a little bit more detail of the attributes. But the attributes are really diverse. You know, everything from even voter data. We have voter data files ingested in our environment, which is a very rich data set. So if we have the very top part of the funnel extremely heavy with a lot of information, we can then distill down to the individual Latinos. And we have a scoring mechanism that allows us to do that, and I'll explain that in a minute. But this number is really important, the 15 million, because yes, there's 55 million US adult Latinos. You can't reach them all. About half of those are under 18. 18 and over adults are about 22.5. We have nearly 70% of those in our data store. So that means that we have a really good representation that is empirical, that is actual transaction of the US Latino. So now when we're working with our clients, it's not about, you know, I have a sample that I'm going to make some inferred decisions on how to best target that Latino. No, I have 7 million US households in California alone. So we can create some very powerful analytics with that kind of data. So I think I want to share with you a little bit more, talk about that 15 million, because it comes to, it really, it's an testament of what we're doing with Justin and his team, that this environment allows us to do what we do. So we pull data, again, from many different sources. And really, we have a data curator that helps us fetch those data sources. Some of them are usual suspects that are data providers and brokers. Others are direct relationships. We have a client right now in the East Coast that is fresh, it's a poultry company. Finding fresh data is really, fresh poultry data is extremely hard. It sounds kind of weird, but it's a very hard data to come by. So we found a data provider that all they do is deli cut meat at the grocery store. So we ingested that data and put it into our environment. So we pull all these different types of data sets, and then we build a scoring mechanism. So in order for us to identify who are the Latinos, it's really a matter of understanding what are the data signals that we're generating. So my footprint, Justin's, and all of us in this audience have different consumer signals. And those transactions is what allows us to determine who's Latino, who's not, But not only that, but it's the language of dominance that's very critical to what we do. We have 4 different grades of the, language dominance. And that scoring mechanism is based not just, okay, I bought the obvious Goya product, therefore I'm Latino. No. What did I pick up in my basket? What's in my shopping basket? What content am I consuming online and offline? Did I pick up people in Espanol? Do I subscribe to ESPN Deportes? So all these things aggregated, combined together, give me a good indication of who's Latino, who's not. That's how we get to the 15 million. And that's how we start basically building models for our clients. So now we have a really powerful asset to work with, right? So that asset off the bat gives us certain information. We have household consumer information. We have behavioral indication of what the household looks like. We also have language of dominance. And if we start taking this to the next level, would be where we work with Carnival Cruise Lines as one of our clients. Carnival Cruise said, hey, listen, I love that slide. I love what you got there. What if I give you 9.2 million records and mash it up with your data? Again, this is where having this flexibility of doing, not just ingesting a lot of data, but ingesting data that is, we're not familiar with that data until we see it. And that then we can ingest it, analyze it, standardize it, and then make it a viable asset. So we did do that with Carnival. We ingested it, we matched it up, we identified those Latinos, and we were able to build some very powerful forecasting of what they were leaving on the table by not targeting this specific market. So, the question that I always say to somebody that tells me a story of what they do is really, so what? What does all this mean? I mean, what do I care that you have this robust environment, that you have all this data? It's really that we can answer very specific questions to our customers. So these questions may look basic to us as marketers in non-ethnic groups. These questions are a no-brainer, but they're not being asked in the Latino market. And there's a reason for why they're not being asked in the Latino market, and it has to do that the data was not there. If I'm using sample data that is somewhat flawed to make a decision, why would I give you more money, more budgets, and more marketing spend if I can empirically prove a positive ROI? So that's really the fundamental approach that we have, that we say, okay, we have a lot of data to be able to do the right analysis, to be able to address questions like these, and to be able to support our clients. And that brings me to an actual example I want to share with you. And I know Justin and I are going to tag team this one. So we all know gut milk, right? And gut milk has some interesting challenges. It's part of the California Milk Processing Board. It's the body that governs milk consumption in California. It's part of a large organization that is in Washington, D.C. They have local chapters across the country. But basically, it's almost like a member environment. All the milk producers of California belong to this. So as a collective group of milk processing board, part of their challenge is that, we're consuming, as adults, we consume less milk. I can't remember the last time I had a glass of milk. Well, I did have one to get the white whiskers before I went to the meeting. But really, how many times do we drink a glass of milk? So adults were not consuming it. There's milk alternative products. So we have a milk substitute, like almond milk, rice milk, coconut milk. And then we have other competing products. So we have, there's probably like 1,000 different iced tea versions now. There's all these products and drinks that are chipping away at their market share. So really what they have been doing prior to this engagement is that they would use some sort of sample, some sort of kind of basic approach to understand a little bit of consumption, to get their pulse on what was going on in the marketplace, but not really a lot of detail in terms of what was happening over a trend line. They certainly could not interrogate the sources to be able to find unknown correlations. And that's where we set out to change the current system that they had. So we said, guys, there's a lot of transactional data that's available. We have household data. We have the UPC. If you provide us the SKU level data, we can identify those vendors in California that are producing milk and the products that are being consumed by both grocers, national chain, regional, statewide chains, like the Vons of the world, but also the independents. Latinos tend to consume a lot of grocery products through independent stores. So we looked at the total universe. It's about 11.5 million households. We had about 60, 70% of that. So we had almost 70% of California consumers in our data store in that 150 million on top of our funnel. So that's what we use as an asset to be able to build some pretty sophisticated BI tools for them. And it wasn't just a Latino approach, right? So what we said is, it's not just we want to understand Latino in perspective to all other groups. So we want to understand African Americans, we want to understand about Asian consumption, non-ethnic groups, and Latinos. So that was what we looked at as a total market strategy. And we wanted to isolate only California. And the way that we did that is all the processors provided us their SKU level codes to be able to only identify those particular in-state processors. So it's interesting what we did. And again, it was completely moving away from any model that they had seen before. So now we have very rich data on the upper left of that chart, which is the data we have. We have the SKU levels, right? So once we had that, we were able to match those transactions to households that would allow us to basically understand consumer interactions and consumption patterns down to the household level and down to certain socioeconomic attributes. Now, this whole environment came together as a single data currency, and I'll explain. The data currency for us, a single data currency, it's somewhat the analogy of a data lake. So for us, having this data lake or a single data currency is the ability to have all the data aggregated in one place that we can then syndicate it to do different things that we want. And I'm using that term syndicated very loosely, but the idea is that, A, I can help produce very specific analytics, or I can cookietize my data and do other things, or I can ingest another third component and be able to cross-reference that as, I want to know milk consumption, not just at the transactional household level, but I want to know what those individuals are watching. So I have set-top box data, I can match that up. Again, that's all residing in this single data currency environment that's supported by Justin and the team in Hortonworks. So we did three things as an output. Once we had this, our analytics team basically produced product consumption analysis. This product consumption analysis, and you'll see the next slide, it's really deep because it's not just milk, whole milk. It's every variation of milk. It's every variation of substitute milk. And it's every category in terms of, is it organic, is it non-organic, is it lactose-free, is it fat-free? So all these different variables come into play. We did a segmentation analysis that allows us to cross-reference consumption to household characteristics. So household income, age, presence of children, no children in the household, all those variables. And then we were able to build trend analysis over a 3-year period. So we can look at historically how all those factors come to play and start finding those either nuggets of opportunity or areas that were completely neglected. And I'm going to talk about a particular case where they did neglect a sector that the agency basically gave them an opportunity to shift their strategy to be able to tackle that group. Just I'm going to let you address that one slide.
So you've heard, I'm still on? Yep. You've heard us refer to the blueprint for enterprise Hadoop, and on the previous slide you see, I'll just drill into a little more detail there vis-a-vis this particular project for milk that Luminar was doing. It was basically, and Oscar and I have talked about this, it was impossible for them to do the type of analysis that they needed to do before Hadoop. Remember what Oscar said, they were trying to get to empirical proof rather than sample hypotheses and testing. When there's a big difference, the way you get to the empirical proof or empirical confidence is you need to have enough data, and it just wasn't possible for them to economically store and process enough data to get there before they adopted Hadoop. So Oscar's mentioned the credit card transactions, set-top boxes, the transactional data, some social media inputs. Also, going back to what I mentioned before about ecosystem and our emphasis at Hortonworks on enabling the ecosystem, they were running Amazon Cloud, R, Talent, Tableau. We didn't want Luminar to have to give any of that up in order to adopt HDP. And in fact, they haven't. They were able to bring HDP in, hook it up to those existing tools and continue about their way. So better ingest as well. They were starting before adopting Hadoop 300 sources, and now they're at 2,000. So imagine the added confidence that brings Luminar and to Luminar's customers. 2 terabytes of data to 15 terabytes of data monthly into the data lake on HDP. And speed to insight, this is very important. So not only did the storage expand by an order of magnitude, but the speed to insight actually reduced by another order of magnitude. So before it was about 3 days to process the data they were getting, a much smaller set of data, and afterwards it's about 3 hours now. So imagine the agility that that gives Luminar to go to their customers and provide valuable information. And you can see there the quote from Franklin Rios, already looking ahead to what else they will be able to do now that this platform is in place and they understand how to use it. So back to this just quickly, these are the specifics of the architecture at Luminar. So we talked in general about the application layer, the BI layer. They're using Tableau and built their own engine, Luminar Insights and data onboarding to look at their data. We're connected to AWS, which is where they were storing some of that data before. And then on the side, you see Revolution and Talend are for some of the analysis. So all that works together without them having to change anything. And I'll point to this again to make one specific point. We talked about the blueprint for enterprise Hadoop and all the pieces that are possible. Now, Luminar didn't need to adopt all of those right off the bat. So the ones that are pulled out in this graphic are the ones that they're actually actively using now. At the same time, they're not fenced in. So in the future, if they want to do search or if they want to do real-time, some type of real-time analysis, it's already there. It's already integrated into HDP, and they can begin to use it as and when they need to.
Great. So I think we covered a little bit of this in terms of our data approach. In essence, what was really important was, we had the data asset that permitted us to do basically mash certain SKU level data into our environment to be able to build the 3 components, the consumption analysis, the trend analysis, and I forgot the last one. But in order for us to do those 3 tasks, we had to have this particular data in. So for us, it was critical that we had the SKU codes from each one of the individual partners. We delivered this initially as a report to our clients, but then we did a pretty sophisticated BI tool, completely custom, that I'm going to review in a minute. And that's what I'm going to review now. So if you look at what we did for them is we developed 12 different unique views of the data. And that data could be everything from product consumption to different trend data to be able to isolate. We created pre-filtered data based on whether it's alternative milk, organic milk. We were able to look at data by different segments in terms of socioeconomic characteristics as well. And all this was delivered, as I said, through Tableau, which is our BI tool. So what's interesting is really the amount of filters and the amount of attributes that are built into this application. So if you're looking at the previous discussion with the other slide, I mean, you really don't fully grasp the number of attributes until we see this slide. So if we're looking at cross-referencing every single milk type product by every different category, by different segments, by different DMAs across the entire state. On the lower left are the KPIs that are important to the milk board. So the KPIs were everything from dollars, absolute gallons, gallons per household, dollars per household. All these are their KPIs that we ingested into our environment to be able to address the questions that they needed to address. And then other things, age, household income, language of preference. So we have different levels of language of preference and language of dominance. And store type. Store type was critical, like I said earlier, be able to isolate those national chains and be able to identify those independents. So the way that we started presenting these, I pulled a few screens so I could show you the type of environment that we built and the type of interrogation that they were doing. These are simple looking graph, but very powerful in terms of the data that they were telling and the insights that they were telling. So if you look at the top chart, basically it's a baseline, a weighted baseline. All the colored dots represent the different ethnic groups and their consumptions per gallons per household. So if you look at, 2012 Q1, we're looking at 4 different dots, and we're looking at the total consumption of dollars that is dropping by African Americans. And we can look at the different patterns by the different groups. This obviously is not interactive, but in the actual environment, in the actual tool itself, you can mouse over any of these data points and be able to see the data that we can't see on the static screenshot. So basically, we also can do long-term trends. So this is really important. And this trend is really critical in one key aspect, that this is the recuperation of a pretty hard economic time, 2008, 2009. So we're looking at consumption over a period that is on the upswing. And then we started finding still certain areas that were very much still in decline, in certain surprising areas that were increasing in consumption, even as we were getting out of very difficult economic times. Any of these trend lines can be isolated by any other factors or any other attributes that I described a little bit earlier. So now let's get to the so what. We knew we had a business challenge. We addressed it. We had the right data asset, right? So we had our data, plus we had the SKU level information. We were able to create the environment that allowed us to interrogate the data with the right models. So really now comes the so what. Now, the so what is really a combination of using our tool, working with the client, and working with their agency. They have an agency that basically helps interpret, and they use the tool as much as the client, as the board members use it as well. Now, one key thing about the members, keep in mind that every member has different uniqueness. So there's milk producers that only produce organic milk. So their interrogation tactics of our tool will be completely different than another producer that has a full portfolio of milk products. So one of the things that we started finding, and I share 3 different sort of nuggets of so what wisdom that we identified, is that actually milk consumption by families that have kids was dropping faster than those families without kids. And that was critical because the whole assumption is that those households with presence of children would be over-indexing, and that was not the case in that 3-year period. The other interesting point that we found, and again, this is kind of insights that would not be available through any of the traditional channels that they had, was basically being able to find the most price-sensitive sector of the population. And we found that the mid-level income was the most price-sensitive. It wasn't the low income, which you would have suspected, that would basically begin to sacrifice, saying, okay, we're not going to spend anymore. We're going to bunker down, and we're during this period of hardship, we're not going to do the spending. That was actually the opposite. And the other insight that we found that was really interesting was basically that English dominant, among Latinos, the English dominant was the group in the population that was declining the quickest. So primarily Spanish speaking, middle income is their sweet spot where they were seeing over-index consumption based on the transactional data that we were looking at. So these kind of insights, again, it's for us to look at them and discuss them, it's very intuitive to have this discussion with you, but for the client to be able to see this and see, wow, it happens that none of my campaigns speak to Spanish-only middle-income Latinos in certain regions. That's really the so what. So they're shifting their marketing dollars to be able to create the messaging that is highly relevant to those specific groups. So that's what I mean by creating actionable insights that this whole environment allowed us to do. So I want to share a few sort of key takeaways. I know we're reaching that time. And this goes back to the point that in order for us to reach this audience in a very precise and relevant way, we needed enough data to do that. We needed a lot of data to be able to do that. And we set out to do this as a company. So we ingested a massive amount of information and data to be able to support our clients and be able to carve more of that budget that is needed to address the samples like the one I just cited a moment ago. Also, it's at the end of the day, it's really about what kind of actionable insights can you generate? What are the frontline actions that I need to take, and how can you help me take those actions? I cited one example, but there's many different examples on how you can do that, and this tool allowed us to do that. And finally, with an environment like the one that we have in support of our clients, it's the only way that I see how we can identify an unknown, recognize those unknown factors that help us create or identify those nuggets of opportunity for growth, or identify those opportunities where we're saying, okay, this sector is being neglected, we need to react. We couldn't have done that with any other method in terms of using sample data or using a small environment. It's the ability to be able to pull in a lot of diverse data in this environment and be able to find those unique correlations that allow us to find opportunities for clients, like we did for the California Milk Board. Thank you.
Do we have about 5 minutes for questions?
We do. We have about a few minutes for questions.
Any questions?
Just quickly, the number of transactions you mentioned is 150 million for 11 million households. It doesn't sound like a lot per household.
150 million nationwide. So for the entire US, we have 150 million individuals. So those are individuals down to the zip code level. Out of those 150, in California, we have about 7 million representation.
So I thought it's the transaction like whatever touch points or what's in the basket or whatever it is.
No.
This data is probably much larger, isn't it?
Correct. I'm only mentioning the 150 million. That goes to Justin's point that we're refreshing about 15 terabytes of data monthly. And that has to do because all those records are pending with transactions that as we get the data sources, we refresh everything in our environment. Any other questions?
How do you go about correlating all the data you get? You said you got income and demographic data and then data from your stores and their purchase activities.
Good question. Part of having this environment is basically for us to be able to have the right data standardization process is critical. So what I mean by that is, my name is Oscar E. Padilla. And I may be in one database as Oscar Padilla and another one O.E. Padilla, all pointing to an address that potentially is correct, but I lived in DC for many years, so it could have been 4350 River Road Northwest. Northwest is submitted. The idea of standardizing the data and basically doing our ETL is finding all those points that point to one individual, to one point of truth. And that's part of our analytics process to be able to standardize the data, pull in diverse data from multiple sources and be able to say, hey, Oscar Padilla from 5 different sources is the one that lives in that address. That's part of our standardization process.
And Oscar, am I right that standardization, without the breadth of data and the amount of data, that their ability to standardize would be diminished? So having those multiple sources that they can look for patterns across multiple Oscar E. Padillas and find out how those things tend to vary, then they can write rules and standardize across the whole data set.
Great. Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.